He says, I want to experience the spiritual resurrection of Jesus, my soul being renewed and Jesus living his life through my body. And I want to experience the physical resurrection of Jesus, that is, my body being renewed again one day after I die and Jesus returns. Paul was talking about resurrection and the resurrection of Jesus specifically, and how it is that people can interact with Jesus' resurrection. And Paul was saying, listen, I want to engage with Jesus' resurrection because the whole point of it is that I get to know him personally in that process. And so he talked about two different kinds of resurrections, Paul did. He said there is a spiritual resurrection, that when a person invites Jesus into their life, Jesus enters in, and by his very presence, his power, he resurrects that person spiritually, like their soul is resurrected from the dead, is what the scriptures say, that we're spiritually dead. But Jesus comes in, because of who he is, he's the author of life, he resurrects that person spiritually. Then Paul said, I want to participate in that. And he goes a little further and he says there's actually that initial resurrection that happens, but there's also in the spiritual realm, there's this ability to let Jesus live his life through me is like another form of Jesus' resurrection taking place, that he's using my body for his purposes. And so it's almost like Jesus gets to live another life through my body as I allow him to and as I cooperate with him. Does that make sense? So that's like this spiritual resurrection that he's talking about. Transformation, I come back to life, and then I let him live his life through me as he is living in me. But then there's also the physical resurrection, an actual physical bodily resurrection. That when Jesus comes back, all of those who have placed their faith in him, he says their bodies will be resurrected from the dead. So no matter if it's in the grave, if it's in the ocean, if it's spread out in ashes on the mountains, wherever it is, he says, I will fuse that body back together, and that person's soul and that body will become one again. And just as I resurrected their spirit, their soul, I'll resurrect their body. And he says there's two resurrections. So Paul says, whatever the case, Paul says, I want to partake of Jesus' resurrection because he said no matter whether it's that spiritual one, which is essential, or it's the physical one, which is going to happen, he said both of those mean that I get to know him personally. So he comes in, he lives in me, he resurrects me, all these things. He's like, the point is I get to know him, and I get to relate to him personally and understand him, and he communicates with me, dialogues with me, all these things, and I have a personal, ongoing relationship with him. So let's listen to how Paul words all of this, and it's a little bit of a lengthy passage, so we kind of squeezed it into 2 slides. Philippians chapter 3, Paul says, I want to know Christ, right? This is the main thing. I want to know Christ, and I want to experience the mighty power that raised him from the dead. Do you see the two things being connected? Knowing him and his resurrection. I want to suffer with him, sharing in his death, so that one way or another I will experience the resurrection from the dead. Now, I don't mean to say that I have already achieved these things or that I have already reached perfection. So Paul's saying, just to be clear, some people were teaching that that Jesus already returned and all these things happened, and Paul's like, listen, just so you know, I've not been resurrected physically yet. Like, that hasn't happened. I'm still in this imperfect body which needs to be remade, but I press on to possess that perfection for which Christ Jesus first possessed me. No, brothers and sisters, I have not achieved it, but I focus on this one thing. Forgetting the past, looking forward to what lies ahead, I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God through Jesus Christ is calling us. So Paul's just saying, listen, I haven't achieved the physical resurrection yet. If he's talking about the spiritual resurrection in some parts of that, it's a little unclear, but he might be talking about, still learning how to let Christ live through him fully. Although Paul is clearly a disciple of Jesus, he's clearly been made new by Jesus and resurrected by Jesus, but he's definitely talking about the physical side. He's like, I haven't been physically resurrected. My body's not perfect yet, right? Haven't experienced that yet. And then he says something which makes me chuckle every time I read it. Paul says, let all who are spiritually mature agree on these things. If you disagree on some point, I believe God will make it plain to you. In other words, you're wrong. If you disagree, God will show you one day. He's like patting somebody on the head. But we must hold on to the progress we have already made. So, a bit of a lengthy passage, but what is Paul talking about? He's just talking about two basic things. He says, I want to experience the spiritual resurrection of Jesus, my soul being renewed and Jesus living his life through my body, and I want to experience the physical resurrection of Jesus, that is my body being renewed again one day after I die and Jesus returns. And he says, I want both of these things because it's all tied to knowing him personally. If I know him, right? If I'm spiritually resurrected, I get to know him. If I'm physically resurrected, it's part of knowing him and experiencing him. And so then he basically says, listen, I'm willing to go through whatever, whenever, to have these experiences, to know him, to come in contact with him, to get to know him at a deeper level even, because Paul is basically saying he's the best thing I've ever encountered in this life. Just before this, he talks about all these achievements that he accomplished. And he's like, that's all garbage. That's nothing compared to knowing him. So basically what I want to draw out of this passage today, and as we're kind of looking back in 2025 and looking forward to 2026 and what all God is going to lead us into, is I want to focus on three of the things that Paul said is part of this process of knowing Christ and experiencing him, his resurrection power within us. He says, one, I'm going to forget what's already took place in my life. And so he says, there's a couple things I'm going to forget. I'm going to forget about all those things that I achieved in the flesh and, that I was so great and I was so wonderful. And I'm going to forget about all that. And even to some degree, he's going to forget about the things that God's already done in his life. Number two, he says, I'm going to press on to move, I'm going to press on to experience more of what God wants to do in my life. In other words, I want to press on towards fresh works of God in my life, him doing new things in me and through me. And then number three, he says, I'm going to hold on to what I've already, the progress I've already made. In other words, whatever's got me to this point, right? The trusting him, depending on him, letting him live his life through me, letting him transform me. I'm going to hold on to those things because those are kind of got me where I am today as I'm trying to move forward.